This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 426, Needs Review Queue Initiative. On today's show, we're talking about the Needs Review Queue Initiative, what it is, and how it's helping to improve Drupal, with guest Stephen Mustgrave. We'll also be covering the translation management tool as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Stephen Mustgrave. Stephen is a senior engineer with almost 10 years of Drupal experience and obsessed with all things Drupal and leaving Drupal better than he found it. Stephen, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us.
Hello.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are joining us for the third time, Melissa Bent, Principal Software Engineer at Red Hat. And also joining us, as per the usual, Nick Laughlin, Founder at Enlightened Development.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy to be here.
Alrighty, let's jump into our module of the week. And now to talk about that module of the week, Martin Anderson-Klutz, a Senior Solutions Engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own, is going to tell us about translation management tools. Take it away, Martin.
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to automate the process of creating content translations on your Drupal site? There's a module for that. It's called Translation Management Tool. The machine name is TMGMT, and it was originally created in January of 2012. It has 7.x-1.0-RC3 and 8.x-1.15 versions available, the latter of which works with Drupal 9 and 10. Now, it is actively maintained. It has test coverage and documentation, and it currently has 595 open issues, 139 of which are bugs against the 8.x branch, which is actually not bad when you consider that it's in use by almost 9,000 websites, probably many of which are using it for some pretty complex use cases. The maintainer is Berdir, who is a very prolific maintainer in his own right, and he also supports well-known projects like Search API, Token, Paragraphs, and many more. Now, Translation Management Tool works by providing a tool set for automating the process of creating your translations within your Drupal site, as well as strings used within the site like menus, interface text, and so on. It works with more than 30 translation service providers, including many that leverage human translators, but also AI-based services like DeepL and OpenAI. It has a plugin system to determine what text needs to be translated so it can be easily adapted to very custom use cases. With the module installed, the Translate tab on your node changes to have buttons that request a translation in each language. And then the translation, once requested, will run through states like unprocessed, active, and finished. It does also provide an option for continuous translation where new and updated content is automatically submitted for translations. It also allows for professional translation at scale using whatever kind of service works best for your site. And, as an aside, the need for robust translation capabilities is what originally got me started using Drupal. So it's great to see that there are enterprise-grade options for sites that need to manage translations at a wide scale. So let's talk about the translation management tool.
This is actually an interesting one because I've actually done a lot of translation, and previously I was using the Lingotech module and using their translation service. And one day I saw a talk, I don't know, I think it was at a camp, maybe it was at a DrupalCon, where they were talking about this and using kind of Google Translate to translate things. And I was like interested and just wanted to see what the user interface was like. So I installed it. It was super easy to get set up with Google Translate. And it it worked really well. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the user interface, and I think it, like you said, it integrates into a lot of other services. So I think this is the module choice if you're using something like Smartlings or Translate.com. So actually, maybe Translate.com has their own module, but anyway. I think that the user interface is good, and the integration with a bunch of different services is pretty interesting. And you know what? Until you said it, I never actually thought of the AI translation road. So consider my mind blown.
We use this extensively at Red Hat, actually. This module, and a lot of it's like add-on modules, continuous jobs, and we use MemSource, which is now Phrase, to do translations. But we have a couple of other strategies and initiatives we use to do translation. Because if you look at like some of our systems on the customer portal today, we actually offer machine translations for certain things because there's just tons of content. So translating the entire thing probably won't make sense if it's not going to like serve the customer base. But it has, like you were saying, John, it's got a really nice interface. You can tell that they've taken the time to actually work with it. And a lot of times many of us have worked in the contrib space, and you're like, yeah, it's great, it works. And then you look at it, you're like, except the UI is not quite there, or you have to click on these better. 6 things. Right. Yeah, exactly. You can tell that they actually put the time into it, like that, like the whole like cart checkout system to get a new one or to auto submit them. It works with the translate tab, like it integrates with that directly. So you can still manually translate things just like normal with Drupal core, but you can also put it through the translation, the TMGMT process. So it's been a really solid module for us. We've actually submitted a couple patches for continuous jobs and different things, but yeah, it's been solid for us.
Well, so you guys using a translation service, or are you just doing your own kind of translation?
We have, I believe, and this is, again, Red Hat's big, right? So that's the teams, but we have a translation team, and I believe they run it through machine translation, and then they review it and fix it after.
Got it.
Okay. So they don't have to start from scratch. So something like that, especially with technical documentation, you have to look through it first before you put it out.
Yeah.
If it's more like colloquialisms, it's probably more spot on. But with this kind of thing, it's like, it can misinterpret things. But yeah, I believe that's what they do.
I was just curious if you guys were using a different service than the ones that I had mentioned before, just to see like what the experiences were. But.
It's MemSource, or they've rebranded as Phrase now, but they were MemSource before. Yeah.
So I'm actually going to have to take another look at this, because I do have a client that used it fairly extensively in the Drupal 7 days, but I don't think it made the jump to Drupal 9 or 10. And I think we're doing mostly manual translations at the moment, which might be why, but I'll have to double check and see if it makes sense.
Something else we're looking through, I know that our translation team, we're working really closely with them to try to automate some of these things even more closely. And it's really, really flexible, because it does let you like download a translation file and then do something else with it. So I know that they've been automating portions of that process on their own to make it faster for them to manage it. And I know that when we showed this to them, because we're also using it, I believe we're also using it in Drupal 7 on some of our legacy sites that are, being migrated. But when we showed it to them in Drupal 9, but not 10, when we showed it to them, they were just like, this is awesome. They were just like, their response was night and day between Drupal 7 and Drupal 9.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to check it out then.
I will say, I haven't done a lot of translation projects since D7, but this is one of the modules that I've kind of been researching, because I believe a lot of our clients are federal based agencies. I think down the pipe there's going to be a requirement here soon that some of these federal websites seem to have more translation options. So been kind of researching, to maybe get ahead of the curve.
Interesting.
Martin,
Canada has that law, right, about French coming out?
Yeah, I was about to say, I live in Canada, and so certainly in my early days of working in Drupal, almost every website was bilingual, having English and French.
Martin, I was going to ask, do you know, or is there a recommendation on whether you would use this module, like if you weren't using a translation service? Like, so Drupal core is pretty robust. Is there any benefit to using this module as opposed to just core by itself?
Interesting question. I mean, it sounds like Melissa's probably used this module as much as anybody on this recording. Melissa, have you used it without like a service provider, just for sort of adding some more like process pieces for manual translation?
Yeah, we actually we have it's a custom patch because it's too custom for what we're doing to contrib back, but we actually use it to separate out layout builder fields so that we can actually translate those as well, like run them through the system and then have it come back and put them in. And we use the asymmetric translation layout builder module for that. And then we're also doing when you don't need to do a service, because you don't have to run it through a service, you can actually tell it to export it as a file, and then it's a translation file, which means it's system agnostic at that point. And that's actually, I think, in a lot of ways what our translation team is going to look at doing, because then it gives them options of what service they need to use. If they want to run it through Google Translate, they can. If they want to run it through whatever, right? And it's formatted in a way that translation services expect. It's a standardized output versus the translation that service that or the method that Drupal offers, which is all like, in the form. You have to fill out the form and submit it because they're expecting you to do it through the UI, versus this, which allows you to be programmatic about it.
I now know who I'm going to reach out to when I have to start translating layout builder, because that's going to be in my future, I believe. So expect a Slack message or email or plea for help.
We have layout builder. We have layout builder with content moderation with translation. It's like, why not throw all of it in there?
All right.
I will say the most difficult issues to review have always been the translation stuff, from the core side at least.
Well, and I think this is a really important topic, and not that this is the main topic we're here to talk about, but I mean, I guess it branches, right, because of the needs review initiative. But I think this is something that doesn't get enough review from the community, it seems like. Because if you install Drupal, the English version or whatever, like a single version or a single language on Drupal works great out of the box. Like everything is tested for. But the moment you go multilingual, the moment you add content moderation and make it more complex, right? Because that's not everyone who's using it, but a lot of the bigger places that use Drupal, like with like higher levels of need for control over their content, that's what they're gonna use. That's a lot of the reason they go to Drupal, is because it provides translation like this, because it provides these kinds of controls over how content gets out. And it's always this way where you install it, and then there's always like a little thing, like something along the way that becomes a big thing, because it's a space that doesn't get. I don't think it gets enough tests from core. This kind of setup.
I agree. More tests is always better, but I have to come to Drupal's defense a little bit and say, as somebody who has tried to localize things outside of Drupal, having one little thing versus zero support is great, because I mean most of the systems don't have infrastructure. I mean, how long was it before React could even do multilingual? Like it just couldn't handle the routing without like writing it yourself, period. But
yeah. I want to make sure that I'm not saying that it's like don't use it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that there's room for improvement there. And the thing is that it doesn't seem like that's being improved as quickly as everything else, because it's not the most common use case.
There's always room for improvement. But on that note, Martin, thank you for enlightening us to the powers of translation, and another wonderful module of the week.
Thanks, Jen.
All right, let's jump into our primary topic. Um, Stephen, let's start pretty softball, pretty easy. I think I think you'll be able to knock this one out of the park. But just wondering if you can give us kind of an overview of what the Needs Review Queue initiative is.
Well, let me like I kind of had like a thing, like how I got to start the initiative itself. When I got involved in Drupal, there was the Bug Smash channel, and that was like a very good introduction for myself on getting involved into Drupal core contributions. And then I noticed as I would do small things, it would just go into like this giant pond of 2,700 issues that were sitting in review from 10 years ago. So, and talking to some of the committers, they were just like, yeah, there's not, a lot of people are spread thin that, actively review and actually commit to Drupal. It's not, I don't think it's as large as some people think it is. So we started the review queue just to try to make sure that, everything gets looked at in at least a timely manner, or, gets the points addressed. So, just putting into review, there's certain core gates that need to be passed, change records for sub maintainer, sign offs, tests. And this is just to get those kind of brought up early. So someone doesn't, submit an issue, wait 4 months, and then someone comes, hey, this actually needs tests. And that person may have gone away at that point. So this is just try to get in there early. And, especially with some of the stuff that needs like framework or release manager, like try to get them in there and see if it's something we even want to, core even wants to do. Sometimes, a lot of issues sometimes get pushed to contrib. Some issues just don't belong in core, too specific.
So we if you've listened to this show, you know that Nick and I sometimes rant about putting patches or comments on issues, and they sit there forever and ever and ever and ever, and then a year later somebody will pick it up and comment or add a patch or do something else, and we'll go, oh well, finally something, right? It sounds like this initiative is an effort to speed that process along, or at least support it and organize it in such a way where things that are kind of moved to needs review can get reviewed and get feedback more quickly. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. Yeah. The goal is to not have anything sit there for longer than 2 months, and that's like the extreme of something sitting there. And that's usually something that is either too complex for myself to review, or it just needs like a specific person, or I'm not great with some components like caching. So sometimes I usually need to, and then that's a part of what I also do a lot on like the Slack channels is I reach out to the people that are smarter than me on these components, and I get them to try to review.
So you mentioned framework maintainers too. I just wanted to circle back to that really quickly because I noticed the other day you were asking about some framework maintainer tags. Can you really quickly give an overview of what it is that they do, and who are the framework maintainers?
If you actually look in the core structure, there's a file called maintainers.txt, and you can see under each component the names of the Drupal users to kind of look under that. Currently, it is being reworked because there are, unfortunately, there are some gaps with some of the components, but really some of those components can probably be collapsed into each other. But, sub maintainers are supposed to, kind of, they have knowledge on a specific component. For myself, I help look after the block content like core module. But, I think the issue that you were referring to, we were reaching out to the views sub maintainer.
Okay.
And then framework just a little higher level, and they're looking at it from the whole platform as a whole.
Okay.
It kind of like and for the gaps, I would say like the framework. If there's a gap in the component and it needs sub-maintainer review, or the sub-maintainer hasn't commented on it in a few days, we do usually bump it to the framework manager.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Yeah, I was curious about that because it's just not a term that I'd heard before. Something that I kind of confused the needs review issue queue with before, and you already mentioned too, is the bug smash initiative. I think some people think those are the same thing, but I think they're a little bit different. Can you talk about what the difference is?
Yeah. So like I said, this started from Bug Smash because that's how that's how I got involved in Drupal. And talking to the people that kind of started and set up Bug Smash, they encouraged me to do this. Unfortunately, I wasn't as great with the name, so Needs Review Queue Initiative is where I ended up. But Bug Smash is kind of just what it is. They do random bug tickets, usually the oldest ones in the queue. They'll triage it, and that usually just involves verifying is it even still a problem in Drupal. Sometimes these bugs I get open 8-9 years ago may have accidentally already been fixed by something else. So they'll triage it or put in like kind of what we're trying to do also in the needs review steps, like, hey, issue summary needs to be clear. Certain issues, especially bugs, they always usually need a test case showing the issue. Certain API changes need to be documented. UI changes need to be noted. Usually UI changes then have to go also through the usability team. Anything with accessibility usually has to get accessibility sign off. Needs review isn't like trying to like circumvent anything. It's just trying to get these tickets that have momentum in front of the right people a little quicker.
So can I ask a clarifying question there? Because as I was researching for this show, I went to the community initiatives page and I saw the Bug Smash initiative. Does the needs review queue initiative sit underneath that? Is it like a subset of that, or is it its own initiative?
It's kind of its own initiative, but like it never got as public as Bug Smash. Like, I wasn't around when Bug Smash started, but I think like they submitted it. And I think that's why when you searched it, you found it on Drupal.org. We just kind of started needs review. And one of the things that really helped the review was his username is nod NOD _.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote this script that will check the review queue and the RTBC queue to make sure a patch or MR still applies. If it doesn't, it actually will send it back. So, you're not wasting a reviewer's time, and the person who worked on it knows very, very quickly, hey, this patch just no longer applies cleanly to, the master branch. I think when he ran that the first time, probably 1,100 issues got sent back.
Oh my God. Wow. But the thing is, it's one of those maintenance things. Like now I imagine things either quickly or fairly often get queued. So I imagine the hit rate is much, much lower, like as a percentage, because now people know that their thing isn't applying. And I think people are moving more towards merge requests anyway. So I feel like that's probably starting to become defunct as well at some point. But yeah, that's great.
Yeah, they really are pushing for the merge request. I think even the other day they ran a one-time script on some RTBC issues that if they didn't have a merge request, they actually just sent it back saying, hey, can you turn this into a merge request? They are much easier to review. And the tests take, like, I think Drupal CI to run the full Drupal suite test takes an hour 15. GitLab, 10 minutes.
Yeah. And you can comment in line much easier on.
Oh, yeah.
Like, never mind like the reviewing and seeing the code changes, because that's helpful, like to see what's around it sometimes, but you could just comment on a specific line. Yeah. MRs are definitely the way to go. Drupal Association, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also because we use GitLab at Red Hat as well, you can make suggestions, right? And then they can be accepted as commits. So if someone is like, hey, I want to make this suggestion to you, but you don't want to like check out the whole thing to look at it or whatever. I mean, if it's like a little thing with code comments or whatever, right? Like you could actually make suggestions in your comment. They can accept it, and it makes it a commit against the MR as well, which is really nice. Also, you can easily format the comments in your code, right? Like, or the comments in the UI. I was going to ask for, because you were talking about like the script that runs, that checks the pending items and make sure that things are good to go. But also there's this needs review bot, right? Like, is that the same thing, or how does that work?
When the script runs, if it sends it back, the bot writes the comment on why it got sent back.
So if the bot checks something, right, and it gets sent back, it sends it back. But then if it's like good and does actually need review, does it email a maintainer, or what's the next step on that?
So if you're like looking for like general feedback and it's not like ready, but you still need some help like reviewing. There's a tag, it's like no review bot you can put on it, and the bot will skip it.
Got it. But I guess my question is more like after the bot scans it and it's good, like what's the next step for it? I mean, I'm assuming somebody like a maintainer has to say, yes, this is good, and move it to like RB, oh my gosh, reviewed and tested by
RTBC.
There it is. Thanks. I got through the translation management one without mentioning that acronym, but anyway.
Once the bot says it's fine, it just kind of stays the same. It's still got to go through the review process, get checked for, the certain things that it needs.
Got it.
And there's been a really big push, when this kind of started, that like the issue summary really needs to be crystal clear on what's being fixed. Cause, a reviewer or a code committer is going to like pop in and read the issue summary, but then, if that ticket has 300 comments, they may not go down all 300 comments. So clearly defining like what are the remaining tasks, what is the proposed solution, any follow-ups that were needed, the problem, the steps to reproduce, all like the issue template that is like the default template, it just really should be used. Even if you don't fill in every section, I think you should still leave like each header there.
I'm sorry. Are you suggesting I don't read the 500 comments that are 3 years old on an issue to get a crystal clear understanding of the whole issue and everybody's thoughts on it?
You can try. I can tell you, there has been one issue since I've started this. I had to move it to another ticket because the page had so many comments it would not load.
I think
multiple times.
I think based on Melissa's nodding of her head, her and I are on the same page. Do not waste your time reading all 500 comments. Just read the issue, read a couple of the latest comments, and get to fixing.
It depends on what you're doing, though, because sometimes you do need to read everything for the context.
Yeah.
So, sorry, what were you going to say, Stephen?
And for some of that stuff, like that's why like constantly updating the issue summary, like for like the valid points, the valid questions, like that's where like the remaining task section is really helpful. And I will say like some of the good that kind of came out of some of the, besides like, the high number of commits, like when we really got into this, like I think 1 week we did 90 commits to Drupal core.
Oh, wow.
But I'm sure you've seen it on tickets where, there's been a lot of, I'm going to say spamming. A lot of people call it credit farming, but spamming on the ticket. So different approaches have been taken. All auto credit has been turned off. So you can upload a patch. You're not getting auto credit. All that stuff is just turned off. They're now using that 11.x branch, which I think some people think that's like Drupal 11. But really that's like the main branch. I think until they can like set up a way to actually use the word main, they had to use 11.x. But everything needs to go there right now. So there's no need to, re-roll for 10.0, 10.1, 10.2, 10.3. There's no reason to like start doing re-rolls for all those different versions now.
So
yeah, people still do that though. I see that occasionally.
So I'm kind of curious. I saw something somewhere that was kind of like showing, and I don't remember where this was, but I'm wondering like if there are stats for the needs review issue queue, and basically like how many issues were there that were like in needs review status, like when you started?
When I started, 2,900.
2,900.
Yeah.
No wonder Nick and I go on rants every like 3
No.
months about issues in the issue
No.
queue. Man.
Now, John, now
Some
you
of
need to
them were 10 years old.
So to counteract John's point, we don't rent all that often anymore, and I think one of the reasons is because of this needs review queue initiative. As you just mentioned, when you started this, there were 2,900 issues. Before I ask my next question, do you know how many issues are in the queue right now?
We've been under 100 for the last few months.
I looked it up. There's 84 as of right now. So you cut it down by a significant portion. Bravo.
About 2,800, if my math is correct.
Yeah. I still credit that bot there. That 1,100 really helped with the review.
Well, that's a large amount. But I'm curious, how long did it take you to get from 2,900 to a more manageable amount where you can kind of keep on top of it?
5-6 months.
Wow.
And like that was like, hey, I'm gonna hit 50 tickets today.
Oh my God.
Does your company
sponsor your time on this?
No. I did some of this on my free time or on the weekend a little bit when I had time, or between work tickets usually. And I said, some of the older ones were not like terribly hard to review because they didn't even apply to 8.7, so I doubt if they applied to 9.5.
Don't downplay it. That's just, I mean, that's a monumental amount of work. Yeah, don't downplay that.
I want to bring this up too, because something that I think, we talk about open source, and I love the concept of open source, and I love the opportunities available inside of open source, right? The things that it lets you do, the communities that are built around open source. But in the end, it takes people to do the work, right? You can have the script that helps you do the work, but there needs to be a person that goes in there and manages that and takes that initiative and has the drive to do it. And whether it's, amazing work on your part, by the way. And I feel like the community needs to understand, like, people like yourself are necessary to make initiatives and communities like Drupal successful, right? I mean, you know that there's only one you, but at the same time, there are people who are touching different parts of Drupal. So I want to call this out because I think it's really important. Open source can't survive without people like you. So thank you for what you've done for the community. This is a huge deal. and you're really good about like saying things like, oh, I just do it because I know. But really, it's a big deal what you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and just say thank you, because we all benefit from the work you guys are doing. So I just want to make sure that I said that out loud. But yeah, I want to also ask, because topics, right? So with all this work you guys have put through, you're combing through all the issues, you're now like keeping it in a manageable place. So like, what's kind of this, how, I know you said before, like 2 months is like the longest you want something to stay there, but like, what's average, do you think, how long it takes for something like how long does something stay in needs review?
It can, some are easier than others. Some, it could be like I try to do like 5-10 a day if I can. And don't get me wrong, like, 20 may come in at any given night. So a week or two, they may stay there. The tough ones may be a month. I mean, right now I think we have like 3 issues that are over a month. So, and those are the ones like I need someone a little smarter than myself. And like I said, I just did the review. Like it was the community that did the work of the tickets, and a lot of them addressed the feedback that was sent. If you look at and I can share this link after this call, but there's the bar chart on the GitHub account for Drupal core, and you can see each month or each week how many commits there were, and we're averaging 50-ish a week.
Yeah.
But that's because people have to send it back and address the feedback usually.
Yeah, I think first of all, I want to call it two things. One, maybe we can, instead of saying somebody smarter than yourself, maybe say somebody who has more specialized domain knowledge or something, because I think at this point that's really what it is. It's not. I mean, actually, yes, there are people on the core level that are levels above us, but we can
like
we can
subject
use
matter
them.
experts, different
Yeah.
skill
Yeah.
sets. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
Absolutely.
still trying to get over the fact that you like, you pretty much squashed 2,800 issues.
Yeah,
So
or got them moving again. And I want to call out, like,
Perfect.
I feel like what you're doing at this level, which is, I mean, it's a force multiplier on some level, but you're kind of being a technical project manager, right? You're making sure that you have the technical chops to look at something and see if something is like, we'll talk about this in a minute when we get to the issue that I've been interacting with you recently on, but you're able to say, like, this is an issue that this person needs to take care of, or this person needs to look at it. You're like, rather than, the core team whose time is very limited, they're very spread thin, rather than them having to comb through the issues and find one that they in particular need to respond to, you're instead giving them a list like, this is ready for you. You don't need to look at it until it's ready for you. Like I said, when we get to my issue, like, there's tons of stuff that you were able to respond to and get me to fix before it got to the person whose time is even more limited than your time. So I was able to fix a bunch of stuff before they got to it. So yeah, I think that there's extreme value in the product to the Drupal project because of that. And I'm sure if we looked at the historical number of commits per week or per month, that it's been trending upward just because they can spend their time on issues that are closer to being ready rather than looking at issues that are further away and then having to say, like, hey, this doesn't apply, re-roll it, or you did this piece is missing tests. Like, they're no longer having to ask for people to provide tests. You've already told them that they need to do that. So by the time it gets in front of them, it's 20% closer, 40% closer, 50% closer. And then they can commit it quicker, which also moves things faster, because if things get committed quicker, that means new issues are further along than, because when issues just get out of date, if the average time to committing is 6 months, well, that's 6 months of changes that have to be reconciled. Whereas if the average time is 3 months, I mean, it's just helpful on so many different levels.
And the tickets I work on, that's kind of how I do. I only like to work on 5-6 issues at a time, but I like to stay on them. And again, that's kind of why I selfishly, I was like, I'm going to start this needs review queue because I'm not getting my stuff reviewed. Is essentially what I told some of the guys jokingly, but I removed the competition of review of other tickets, and now my stuff gets reviewed.
That's amazing. But this is the core of what we were talking about, though, right? Is that it takes people to do this kind of thing. It's not just that you see a problem, is that you create the solution to the problem as well. And that's a huge deal. And the words that kept running through my head are, you can have collaboration. Like, there's a lot of collaboration going on Drupal.org, like, all the time. You look, hence 500 comments, right? But at the same time, someone needs to coordinate that effort. And like Nick was saying, you have people whose time is in high demand. And if you can have someone triage that before it gets to them, it helps move things along. And, otherwise, especially because Drupal has scaled, like, the community has scaled so much. It's just, there's too much there for them for that to be on them to have to review all those things when they come in. So this is great to hear.
I mean,
that's why, I think the restructuring of the components is going to be a big deal, because it's going to hopefully fill in some of the gaps. Like, some of the other things that kind of came out of this, there were some features that were really needed in GitLab, because I'm sure you guys know, but eventually it's going to only be GitLab. There's no patches anymore. So there's a lot of features that we like now. So they added this test only feature to GitLab, which is the equivalent of the test only patch that people used to upload. You can go into the test job, click on it and it just runs your test file. It tells you if you failed or not. And then there's been some issues that, people have worked on, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, but like some issues do need to get in the eyes of like the core committers and framework managers a little sooner and then there's this new tag called architectural review. And that's just where, someone needs the committers or framework will look at it and just agree on the approach before anyone wastes months of time trying to implement it in some fashion. Like, let's agree on the approach, agree that it's even going to be something that core would consider.
You treat it more like an actual project or feature request, right? Because that's what we do when we intake things too. You talk to each other, you get the information out of it, then you build a plan, you agree on the plan, and then you activate the plan, instead of just like saying, what does everyone in the world think? Right? You kind of like say, this is the direction we'd like to go.
So my next question feels silly because we've already talked about how much you've been able to do, right? So I'm gonna change it up a little bit. So it sounds like the initiative is going well. You guys are kind of keeping you are keeping things organized and keeping kind of the needs review queue down, below. Nick said it was below 184. I'm wondering, I'm assuming it's not just you in your free time managing this. Is there like a dedicated team of like, how many people are you working with, or are you purely just reaching out to people as need be? Like, oh, I'm going to reach out to Matt Glauman because he knows a lot about caching and I need somebody to look at this for caching. Like, what does your kind of like day-to-day look like on this?
As of right now, it is just me just kind of reaching out to people.
Okay.
Like I said, I try to do 5-10 reviews a day. And that usually keeps it in the manageable spot. Because sometimes, and then there's certain issues that, it's not like every issue has goes through me. Like there are those issues that, got a high attention outside of me. More I'm looking after those stuff that just is on no one's radar. Yeah. Like, just there's small things. So
you're focusing primarily on issues that have been in needs review status for a pretty, a long period of time or a certain amount of time, right?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely try to look at the more, majors, the criticals, if they come through first. And there's certain components, like I know that like are really getting pushed by certain groups, like that new single directory component module. That's got a team of people. Like I very rarely have to do any look at those tickets, because by the time they're posted in review, someone will have gotten to them. I know the big push for like the config schema updates, like those get a lot of attention too.
Yeah, I noticed. So this past weekend, I worked on an issue for the navigation module, and that's got a big team behind it as well. And that was reviewed and merged like within 24 hours. So that was impressive. Are you? So it doesn't sound like you're only working on core issues, right? You're working on any issues in the need review status
for the initiative itself, just core.
Okay.
I do have a few of my own modules. They're not the greatest. A lot of them are just forks. We have to do a lot with USWDS on our projects. So I've forked a number of like Bootstrap modules, usually for USWDS, and they usually take my attention.
I do have to say that I think the way that I found out about the initiative is because I noticed your name popping up on almost every single issue that I was looking at. It actually makes me think I'm going to have to reach out to Tim and see who the #1 commenter on Drupal.org is, because you got to be approaching the top, because you're always there, like just saying like, hey, this is the next step, and moving it from needs review to something else. But I'd like to kind of talk through a specific issue now a little bit, and it's an issue that I've been interacting with you a fair amount on over the last couple of weeks. It's another issue that was opened about 10 months ago or so. Our listeners will be familiar with it, because the reason why I'm working on it is because I opened my mouth on this podcast and kind of feel responsible to try to see it through. And that issue is allowing site builders to choose a heading level on views for the pager, because right now the pager is just a static H4, which many times for accessibility reasons is not sufficient, because it puts them out of order and that throws a flag. In the grand scheme of things, it's not the biggest accessibility issue because it's a heading level, they can get to it. But one of my theories is if you can remove false positives or false negatives or even like minor issues, it means that people could pay more attention to more severe accessibility issues, right? Incremental improvement is important. So I think we talked about it initially. I think it might have been with Benjamin, and we, I kind of went down the route of just removing it and using area labels, which actually, because it didn't change a lot of stuff, was pretty easy to get committed and it got released. And then it turns out that was the wrong, speaking of discussing approach, it turns out that is the wrong approach, and that actually hurt accessibility. And after some discussion, it was very quickly reverted, and some accessibility experts provided a lot of resources and determined that the better route is to make it something that you can set, right? Mm-hmm. I got that as far as I could. I didn't write any tests yet because I didn't really know where they should go. Another person, Tony, kind of took up the reins at some point and made some additional changes, although he put them in a patch. So after I saw that he had made those changes, I then converted his patch back into the MR and got it further along. Got it as close as I could, thought it was ready, put it in needs review. Now that's where you came in. So this is about, I hadn't been consistently working on it, but about 10 months after it finally got to needs review and was configurable. Can you talk about how you got up to speed on that issue? How you figured out we can read your comment if we want, but you basically said that I needed to write a config update, post update hook, I think. How did you kind of get up to speed on what was happening, what was missing?
Just kind of from doing a lot of reviews. Any new schema change, I've just known from previous tickets that it's going to need an update hook. I don't know if I put this in the comment or the chat, but the rule of thumb that I forgot who told me this one, but like if you go to like where this new setting is going to be, don't change anything and click save and do a config export. If it changes your config, then it should have had a update hook.
Smart.
So I saw there was a new config for the view settings, and just based on how I've seen other view settings, and from what you've done, it looks like it's been good. I haven't had a chance to review it this week, but I know update hooks for views is not easy.
Oh, I have to say, this has been the most complex thing I have ever done in Drupal. It has been, so you reviewed it, and then Len Dude on Drupal.org reviewed it and provided some key insights. And I think he's reviewed it 3 times, and each time he's had really valid feedback that has essentially had me needing to rewrite vast portions of it. I think he mentioned that views, especially views config things, are always complex. I'm learning, like, it's so funny because on its face, like, we're just adding the ability to choose what heading level it is. That's so simple. But one of the things that has really made this complex, this is a bit of an aside, is that there are actually 4 different types of pagers for views, and you only need to update 2 of them, right? There's some and none, which are technically pagers, but we don't want to update those because some just displays a certain number of items. There's no pager, and none, there's no pager. So we don't want to update that schema. There's full, and there's the mini pager, which people are familiar with. But one of the complications is that the full pager uses the core pager, system pager, that other sections of the site use, and the mini pager is only in views. It's not used anywhere else. So each round of this has definitely provided, that feedback, but each of them have also sent me kind of down a rabbit hole of, fixing broken tests once I make the suggested change. So my next question is how often do you kind of check in on an issue once you've kind of updated something? Do you kind of just check it daily, weekly, or do you wait for, because one of the things I've noticed is things haven't always get put back into needs work. Sometimes it stays in. I've been very, I'm trying to get this done, so I've been very quick to respond to either your or Len's feedback, but I'm sure that's not always the case. And I'm curious, how often are you checking in? And if it just kind of sits there for a while, do you move it out of needs work into, from needs review to needs work?
It's a case by case. For like this issue, like, it clearly sounds like you're still working on it, but like you're actively working on it. So usually I'll just leave it alone. I'll let it be. But like if I saw there was feedback and then the person went away for a few days and I came back to it and see like nothing's changed, then I'll probably put it back to like needs work and just say like, hey, needs work for feedback in the MR or needs work for comment 6. But I mean, if you're actually working on it, like I'm not gonna like just keep moving it to need work to keep the number in the review queue down. Some issues, like I do flag for myself. If it's something that really does interest me that I reviewed and no one picks it up after like a month or so, I was like, you know what, I'll work on this.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, it's like I said, I've learned more about the internal workings of Drupal from this one issue for sure. But yeah, I kind of wanted to talk through it a little bit because, like I said, this is I've seen you on tons of issues, kind of moving them along, but I think this is the first issue I'm actively working on where you've been providing reviews. And so I was kind of curious about how you came across, how you came up with what was the next step, because I think it was accurate, right? Setting up the update hook is where I figured out where, which tests needed to be written, and writing the test is how I figured out that what I was doing wasn't doing quite what I thought, and things weren't actually working. So like if that had been, obviously it wouldn't have been committed because it still needed a review. But once I wrote those tests, that's how I found out that it wasn't like the 2 pages were actually different. So something working in one wasn't actually working in the other. So, I mean, that's, I guess that's another shout out. Like the testing system and infrastructure for Drupal is extremely robust. Like things other than the JavaScript test that we were talking about before the show, if a test fails, it's probably because of something you did. And when you dig in, it's usually pretty clear what went wrong. But that is what can make you confident that the change you're making, once those tests are passing, it can make you confident that you're not going to break other people's sites. And Drupal is used by so many people and is so complex at this point that, this project wouldn't be able to sustain itself without that.
Yeah, I did a ticket for block content because we did a lot of changes for 10.1 where we moved the block library to the content region. And I was, we have a lot of follow-ups for that. I don't know if anyone's on 10.1 yet, but like, the block library is now under content, not blocks anymore.
Really, I didn't notice that. I do have a couple of sites on 10.1, but I haven't looked at the blog page. So
if you're using admin toolbar, it won't be reflected because admin toolbar has to. I think admin toolbar needs to be updated. But yeah, if you go to content, you'll see there's now a tab for blocks. But
really?
I was fixing some of the follow-up stuff for that. And then I started breaking like the JSON tests, and that's when I was like, my change and it was valid. I had to take into account, but it was very valid. And like you said, like the testing system, and like some people get a little annoyed by that. Like they'll make like a few line changes, and I'm like, hey, especially for bugs, like they need a test to show that it's an issue. And some people get a little upset that like they need to figure out how to write a test for it. But I'm like, you don't want it coming back.
Yeah, and to Melissa's comment earlier about translation, one of the tests that broke was translation, and it was basically one of the ways that translation is tested is it imports a bunch of views config and then translates that view and then compares to make sure that nothing broke, essentially, that no config changed, because it's just changing the translation. And my changes, because the schema change, broke that test because now it was putting in the pagination setting. And so all I had to do was add the correct schema to those, because now those views expect that schema, otherwise they'll change. But there's tests around multilingual to make sure that something that somebody like me is doing isn't going to break your multilingual view down the road.
And as I've gotten better with the reviews, like there's certain things I can just, like I said, the schema, it needs an update hook. New functions, they should be type hinted. Core wants everything to be type hinted, but they can't because of their commitment to backwards compatibility. Like new things can be, new parameters can be, and then like every time you add a new say you're adding a new argument to a constructor, you got to do the whole, trigger error if someone doesn't pass it in. This is required in 10.3, but we'll throw an error in 11.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's the thing is, it becomes when you have a project of this size, seeing behind the curtain a little bit has been fascinating. Like, I knew a lot of this stuff theoretically went on in Drupal core, which is one of the reasons it's been so stable. But seeing behind the curtain certainly has given me a newfound appreciation for the amount of work that goes into these things.
Yeah, and there's one URL that we like to when for replacing something. Honestly, maybe like a Russian URL or something, but it searches all of Drupal.org. So like if you're trying to see if someone is extending a class in core, you can check all these contrib modules and see was anyone actually extending it, and then that kind of determine that can weigh into a change or not. Yeah. If you find like 6 contrib modules that are very active are using this class, you gotta do like that backwards compatibility dance.
Yep, makes sense.
Thinking about the people of Drupal, right? The community of Drupal, the open source requires people to get things done, right? How can the Drupal community help out this initiative? What can they provide you guys? How can they come alongside you, or
a few things that I would love to see still is, I still see some people, when they create a new ticket, they remove a lot of those sections because they didn't want to fill it in. Like the default template that comes with the issue queue, I wasn't around, but I imagine those were picked very specifically for a reason. So even if it doesn't apply, put like an NA in the section. Like if it's not a user interface change, just say that that's no user interface change. But like learning the core gates, like the things that like a ticket must pass before it can get committed, it is very helpful. So like, I'm sure like from doing all this work now on this one views ticket, you probably know like any schema change, I got to write an update hook.
Yeah.
But like, any user interface change, there's you should have screenshots in the issue summary. The steps to reproduce for a bug need to be there. Proposed solution needs to match what is actually being proposed.
That's something that I was talking to Martin about actually at the camp this weekend. Is some of that knowledge it's tough to document, but it'd be one of the things that would be really helpful for the project. Like, for example, you asked me to put a screenshot in the UI section, and at first I thought you meant in the change record, so I did that. But then I was reading the issue summary and saw UI changes, like, oh, this is what he meant. But like, I've seen that template 100 times, but didn't even think of it. Or like the post update hook, you told me that you needed it, but I had no idea where to even start. But Len said like, oh yeah, that's something that needs to happen here. Here's another issue that did the exact same thing. And that's what got me down the path of like, I would have never been able to figure out how to do that, because again, not to go down that rabbit hole again, but Vue's schema is so complex. It has its own like custom config updater method or class to handle that. I never would have found, I mean, eventually I would have found it, I suppose, but I probably would have given up, because it, like, getting those like little breadcrumbs at each stage has allowed me to keep going in an area that I'm until now was completely unfamiliar with, right? But how I think one of the things that I'd love to solve, and I have no idea how to even begin to do this, is how do you get those breadcrumbs for the right people in the right time for the right issue? And I think you're doing a large part of that, a significant portion of that. And like I said, I'm not trying to say that you should do more, right? Saying that the post update hook needs to happen is what got me down that path. And I'm not trying to put more burden on you by also saying like, oh, find an example, right? I'm not trying to do that whatsoever. But having that piece of it too is important. And if we can find a way to like maybe have examples, like an examples page, like if you need to do this, like a curated list of types of things, like this is an issue that solves this issue. Yeah. So one of the things I'm thinking is if we have some sort of index of issues that solve particular issues, that like the community working group has prompts that for you to be able to say this needs a post update hook, and then you link to a page that has examples, and I can just search that page for post update hook and get linked to this issue that solved it. Like that's helpful for other developers that are trying to work through it too.
I'm not gonna lie. The use of the word issue 3 times in one sentence makes it feel a little bit like Inception.
But I do know
Well,
what you're talking
I
about,
think
because, like, there's 16,000 issues in Drupal core. It's hard to find.
Yeah.
It's hard to find that one example of what you also did.
Yeah.
when I think something that this brought up to me just now, when I talk with our QA folks here and previous companies as well that I've worked with, I think it's incredibly useful for people who are submitting tickets to have like a list of this is what a good ticket looks like. If you want the best response you can get, here are gold star tickets, right? And to be like, and then say why. And that actually might be worthwhile to have as like a ticket of the week kind of thing, right? Like where you're just, we actually used to do that. Our QA folks did that like two companies ago that I worked at. They would be like, this is the ticket that had it all, that made our jobs easier, did all these things. So I'm wondering if that might be helpful or useful, but it also might bring some more eyes on the needs review initiative in general to be like, hey, how can we help each other out to make the community as a whole better? I mean, not to make more work for you, but it seems like as you're working, you probably come across a ticket and say, this has exactly what I needed to do what I needed to do, right?
But I mean, doesn't and I guess, Melissa, this is more of a question for you, but doesn't the issue template that people get when they go to fill out an issue help with that? Or do you think people are just ignoring that?
Well, and Stephen
Sorry.
was talking about how people just delete portions of it that they don't care about. they don't want to fill out, right?
But isn't that so? I'm going to incriminate myself here, but that's all right. Like I feel like sometimes the template is there as a best as a guide, right? To say, hey, fill this out and give us as much information as you can. But sometimes there aren't, like, for example, like the proposed fix. Like I'm always like, well, the proposed fix would be like, it doesn't cause this error when this thing happens, right? So I mean, I think parts of it sometimes don't necessarily apply, but I mean, I think it's a good starting point, right?
I was gonna say, at least for bugs, I want to see, what is the problem, especially what are the steps? Like, how did you reproduce this?
Yeah.
And usually the proposed solution, like, agree, it can be case by case. It could be, do a validation check before this, or it can be, as simple as like this just needs to be fixed. Like that can be the proposed solution. Yeah, so that's like, those are usually like the 3 main sections I need to, like, for a bug ticket.
Right.
And sometimes it depends on the life cycle of the ticket, right? Because going back to the one that I'm working on, like initially the proposed solution was to replace the heading with an ARIA label in the nav and just get rid of the heading entirely, and then deprecate the heading ID attribute for removal because we didn't need it. And it turns out, like I said, if you were interested, we'll link the issue in the show notes again, and you can read Andrew McPherson's awesome write-up on it. That was the wrong approach, and it got reverted. And then the new approach was to, make the changes that I made. So the point is, you should leave them there even if they're empty or not applicable. Or like the UI changes, I couldn't show the UI changes until I'd actually implemented it, but now there's a screenshot there. But so having a blank section is better than deleting the section.
I will say, going back to earlier in the show about issues with 500 comments, I followed that issue when Nick first brought it up, and I get emails for every single comment on that issue, which is educational and yeah. Anyway,
I was just saying that just because a template exists doesn't mean people fill it out in a way that's helpful. Because I was a teacher for a number of years, and you give people instructions and they almost never follow them the way you've written them. It just is what it is.
That is true.
And I feel like what Stephen's calling out is the thing that all teachers would say, is that it's so much easier to grade correct papers than to grade incorrect papers. Because if it's incorrect, you have to go on a fact-finding mission as to where the issue is. If you want something to get done quickly, you need to write it in a way that's accessible and complete for the needs review people or whoever is going to be helping, right? To follow up on. And whether it's a bug ticket or a feature request, obviously those have different necessarily they have different requirements. But at the same time, I feel like it might be useful to be like, this is a great ticket and this is why, because then it shows people, include screenshots, take a second and take a picture of what you're looking at, because just because you say what you're saying doesn't mean that everyone's interpreting your words the way you said it. Also, it's a documentation for your future self. Like, how many times have you looked back and been like, I wrote this? I don't remember writing this. Like that happens all the time too. So I just, it's an idea. Obviously, like I said, it doesn't have to be done, but I like the idea.
I mean, and I know no one likes reading documentations, but like the documentation of like the issue queue on Drupal.org, they mention a lot of the tags that we like to use. And I know some people like, there are a lot of tags that are like spam tags that probably had a meaning when they were first added. But like a lot of them like now aren't. So we kind of use the same group now though, but like, if it was tagged needs tests, needs change records, issue summary, upgrade path, those mean something. And if I come to a ticket and I see that those tags were still there, that's the first thing I'm looking for inside the patch or the MR. Is that
just out of curiosity, is that tagging field still like an open field that you can put whatever you want into?
It is, unfortunately.
Melissa, I agree with you. People provide enough information to make the ticket useful. I got this error without anything to reproduce any, that's not helpful. So I definitely agree with that. Maybe a couple of examples would be kind of cool. But as we add more work to Stephen's plate, I'm wondering if somebody wanted to get involved, wanted to help you out, wanted to get to a lower number, an even lower number, I guess I should say, of issues that need to be reviewed. Stephen, how could somebody do that?
Just join the Slack channel. We've tried a few different ways to we tried to do that traditional bug smash, they have like the bi-weekly calls where like they'll smash a few issues as a group. We tried that. Now I think maybe I was picking bad time zones because I wasn't getting a lot, but that could be a way. Like, it's like, hey, I'm trying to review this. Like, what do you guys think?
I think they call them fortnightly.
Yeah.
Which I was chuckling to myself because I'm like, oh, I will see you in a fortnight. So the Slack channel, that sounds like a perfect way to get involved and jump right in.
Yeah. And novice review tickets are far to come by, but they are usually, we will hold a few, especially like before a conference like DrupalCon. We had a few novice issues that were tagged for good candidates for DrupalCon to be reviewed.
But okay, I mean, you don't. It's nice to have novice issues and have new people or people that are a little less experienced come in and try to tackle those. But I mean, like, your use case, right, of like going out and getting people that can help and highlighting an issue is I think a transferable skill, and a skill that I actually used this weekend. I was working on this issue and needed to write an if statement that was using a service, and that's not something that I'm overly familiar or comfortable with. So I was at New England Drupal Camp and tagged one of the developers that was there and said, hey, can you help me with this really quick? And, it took, 15 minutes. We kind of went through it together and edited the code and submitted a MR and then we were like, okay, we're good. And, it went, down the, got reviewed, got pulled in. So I think, to say like, hey, jump into the issue queue or jump into the Slack and find an issue. And then if you need to ask for help or tag somebody else in, like, yeah, that's totally an acceptable path forward too, I think.
You got to remember too that these tickets are at a different stage, John. I think than that. It's not like this is an issue that needs work and needs something to happen, like needs code. These are tickets that the person has worked on, has passing tests, and thinks they're essentially ready to. Maybe there's a specific question that they have, but generally, like, is like, I think this is ready to be merged. Somebody needs to review this. Maybe I'm wrong, Stephen, but is that accurate? Is that usually what people are putting in, or do you think it's more like, hey, I've done this as far as I can. Somebody needs to review this to tell me the next steps. Like, what are you looking for in the needs review queue?
So ideally, that would be all the tickets that we would see. Is people have hit all the check marks for a core gate. A lot of times it's not. They're missing pieces. They didn't want to add tests. Sometimes people like just re-rolled it and put it back into review, and ignored all the tags and all the comments above that.
Yeah.
Were so that's just got to go immediately back. Like I now put like, hey, I've not reviewed this, and that's mainly for when it ever does, like if it does get moved forward, the committers do actually have to read all those comments and see who contributed to the ticket when it comes to crediting. So when I say I don't review it, like that means just don't give me credit.
I do have a question about that, actually, by the way, because again, if people are sick of hearing about this issue, it's the issue I have experience with, so I apologize. But for example, I built some of it ends up not being the approach that we're taking, but I built some of this work that I'm doing based on some other people that did work on another ticket that we closed as a duplicate. If I want to make sure that they get credit for that, should I just leave a comment saying like, hey, I built on this, or like, for example, I noticed that one of the patches, people that provided some patches got unchecked, but I know that I built on stuff that he did. It ended up getting ripped out and refactored, but it was definitely a step in the process. How, is there something you would recommend to make sure that those people get credit?
Comment works, posting in, contrib. I think that's probably the most open Slack channel. Usually with duplicates, like since I'm like one of the many sub maintainers, I can move over credit to a ticket. So like I would do that if I saw, like if I were to close a ticket as duplicate, I'd look at the duplicate one and see who actually contributed meaningfully. Some issues don't get like we were saying, we used to have that problem where people would upload a patch for 10.0, 10.1, but 10.0 still applied to 10.1. So they re-uploaded the same patch. So like we don't give that, stop giving credit.
Yeah, makes sense.
And I would say like overall, because of this initiative, like we've had meaningful conversations about like it started like all the contributions and like trying to improve that, because I know the community has had a lot of frustrations when it comes to their tickets being spammed.
So I've got one final question before we get ready to close out the show, and that is, do you think that this has helped with burnout for some of the core maintainers, just having a more concise list of issues that are curated?
Yes and no. Because especially when an event goes by, like they're usually at that and like they'll get like a week behind. So like RTBCQ, they actually just knocked a bunch of it down, but it was up to like almost 200 like a week ago.
Oh wow.
And then they like collectively had to like start looking at it, and some things got committed, some things got tagged like, hey, this actually probably needs sub maintainer review, this is missing blah blah blah. So it's always like trying to like improve the process I'm doing too, so like they don't have to send it back.
Got it.
So as we close out the show, I wanted to ask what's in the future for this initiative? What kind of future plans do you have, or roadmap, or anything like that?
Just maintainability. Like I know Bug Smash just realigned what their next goals are going to be, which I think they're going to do something along the lines of they're going to pick 20 bug tickets, and that's their set until they're done. So I like that idea. Review, I'd still just like try to keep it below 2 months.
Awesome. Well, Stephen, thank you for joining us. And, I think Melissa already said it, but thank you for the hard work and, and definitely keep it up.
No problem. I appreciate it.
And for our listeners, do you have any questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and the listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
And you can get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right, everybody, we've made it to the end of our show. Stephen, if folks wanted to get a hold of you, how could they go about doing that?
I'm on Slack, just S Musgrave. I'm on a lot of the Slack channels, contribute, Bug Smash, Needs Review Queue, Initiative. But if you just at me on whatever channel you're on, I'll probably join that channel too.
There you go. Melissa, what about you?
I'm also on Drupal Slack. My handle is Meraluka, Merauluka. I was looking through my history on Drupal.org, and I have 3 issues credited in my name for Drupal core. Only a couple of which I actually did bug fixes for, but I did tests on others. So I was just like, oh, I've arrived. I've committed to core or contributed to core. But I'm also on Drupal.org. It is very exciting when that first one goes in. So same name, Merauluka on Drupal.org as well. And most social media that you can find.
There you go. Nick Laughlin, what about you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at NixVan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at EPAM.com.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Have a good one, everyone.